Terrorist-related violence has once again struck, this time in the Russian North Caucasus, in the Republic of Ingushetia, killing 2 policemen and wounding 2. The bombings come 1 week after 2 explosions killed nearly a dozen people in nearby Dagestan. Several of the victims of those attacks were also policemen. And of course the twin bomb blasts in Moscow's metro, which killed some 40 people. What has happened to increase these attacks in Russia? To discuss this more, Nader Mokhtari joins us here in the studios in the capital Tehran. He's a columnist and commentator. Also from Moscow, Dmitry Kosyerev, who's a political analyst from RIA Novosti news agency. Gentlemen, thank you both. Let me go first to Nader Mokhtari. Let's look at, well, the recent increase in terrorist attacks. Do you think it's domestic or international?
Well, I can go down the road of explaining how it all started. It all started during the Cold War with the U.S. funding certain groups for intelligence gathering within the Soviet Union, if that has happened. And this was continued, and the U.S. Covertly is involved in funding certain groups to bother Russia whenever the U.S. has a point to get across. However, we must not lose touch with the fact that groups have sprung up who call themselves traditionalists, but that translates into Salafis. In Islam, it's young men trying to reach perfection in their own interpretation of Islam, and going about and bringing harm to their communities. But funnily enough, such actions often follow heavy-handed tactics by the Russian Interior Ministry, police, and they generally are in reply to their tactics.
Okay, Dmitry Kosyerev, do you agree with Nader Mokhtari, some of the reasons he cited?
Well, not exactly. The case of the recent attacks is very clear. Several rebel leaders have been cornered, some of them killed, and known terrorist cells have been bust. And their wives, in most cases, according to local custom, which is not exactly a Muslim, it is something very local and very strange. You can even call it Indian if you wish. They're supposed to kill themselves, exploding some people around. What is important is that this is not Chechnya Republic, it is other republics near Chechnya, and it shows that things are very bad in the northern Caucasus in general, and they became bad exactly when the Russian president began to, shall we say, a series of reforms in these republics, rooting out corruptions, changing local governments, and grabbing local terrorist leaders. So it's a retaliation, and frankly speaking, I am not sure that anything can be done to prevent this kind of retaliation. You cannot anticipate where they could strike, and you cannot let the things lie low like they used to be. Because if there are terrorist cells there, they have to be rooted out. So this is kind of inevitable consequences that we all have to suffer.
Okay, an inevitable consequence. It'll be hard for it to be rooted out. Nader Mokhtari?
Absolutely not. The gentleman knows full well, your guest in Russia, knows full well about some of the tactics that have been used. It is funny that he mentions the wives of these Ingushetians or Chechens, because the internal security has been abducting their wives and children and bringing them back harmed. These aren't the kind of tactics used by honorable governments. The Russian, I advise Russia, Moscow in particular, to look more closely at the methods that are being used by the Russian internal security against these people. Their actions against Russian civilians have followed actions by Russian internal security against their civilians. So this has been tit for tat. Normally, these so-called terrorists only target Russian security forces. It's only when the Russians have gone out and have abducted their children and their wives or their close members of the family and have brought them to harm, many of them have disappeared, that such outlandish actions, such as we saw in Moscow, have taken place. Okay. Now, I'm not in any way supporting or condoning the acts that have taken place. Civilians are civilians no matter where they are. But Russia is aware that the US is egging this on via proxy governments, Muslim governments, and Russia should take a more considered line. Russians are great at the game of chess. They are more capable than going for such Cold War era tactics. They can, should they choose to take a different line with their southern republics, they can bring about the sort of change that is required to spare them the violence and spare them the interference that they so hate by the United States.